I've noted with keen observation that the office of the First Lady and the office of the Second Lady of the Republic of Kenya are in a very big quagmire.
Hii nchi inaendeleshwa na katiba na sheria, na mambo ya kuabudu, sisi tuko huru kuabudu kulingana na vile sisi Biblia inatuambia. Na kwa hivyo nilikuwa nataka kusema hivyo kwa sababu ikiwa mambo ya Mkristo moja akipatikana kona shida, mwili wote wa Kristo unajumulishwa na kuambiwa kila mtu akona shida au yeye ni muharifu. Sisi hakuna kitu cha mtu tumeharibu.
Because one office is kind of trying to accept that, it is time for the church to be regulated. And the other faction is trying to go contrary to that by saying that just because one part of the body of Christ messed, we should not subject the entire body of Christ to regulation and actually go and vilify the entire body of Christ. So it is kind of a quagmire which is now going to take a different political narrative altogether. And as a matter of fact, if you've been very keen, you might have realized that since we had this, very unfortunate, incident of the Shakahola, the deputy president's office, okay, and to be very specific, Dorcas Rigathi Gachagua, has actually found harder time to balance whatever he is saying, because one time she says this, and the next day, another thing comes up altogether, and another totally different narrative comes up, especially in line with what the government should do. And most of the time, because she was kind of linked to a Pastor Ezekiel who was apprehended, and maybe the government was trying to bring in the aspect of him having a relation with the Shakahola guy. He found a hard time trying to balance his words and what the government needs to do. And even if you look at Rigathi Gachagua himself too, he has also found a very, harder time.
What happened in Kilifi, by whatever name, is a criminal act and is unacceptable. And the government of the Republic of Kenya will not allow anybody to hide behind the pulpit, to hide behind the Church of Christ, to commit crimes. Criminals will be dealt with as criminals in accordance with the laws of this country, in accordance with the Penal Code and the Criminal Procedure Act, because it is not right. And we want to urge those who are talking about what happened in Kilifi not to condemn the entire Church of Christ and not to condemn all our pastors. The church is a reflection of society because the membership, this congregation, is part of society. So what happens in society is the same thing that is happening in church. In the society there are a few characters who are not straight.
He's also found a harder time to talk about the issues of, regulating the church. What, the wife of Raila Odinga, Ida Odinga, once kind of suggested that the churches need to be regulated. In fact, we need not to just have churches coming up like a mushroom, mushrooming of the churches. We don't even know, the history of these leaders of the church. We don't even know their legality. We don't even know what they are doing. Somebody just comes and they start a church like that, preaching false doctrine and bringing in radicalization that are not supposed to be seen in the country. In fact, out of all this quagmire, it only denotes one thing, that the government, first of all, will not find a solution to this. When you read the history of cults, when you read the history of how these things happen, you will get that sometimes it takes a deeper dimension to an extent that if the roots are so, well established enough, then, at the center of it, the government, some of the key figures in the government, key, very, very strategic, well positioned, well established figures in the government are the ones who are kind of trying to nourish the culture to continue. So for it to be uprooted, the entire thing, in the process of, people trying to debate about it, people trying to bring in emotion, you see one politician speaking a different language, you see the government trying to bring in a kind of a framework where, laws need to be passed and regulatory framework need to be harnessed. So the entire process brings confusion, and at the end of it, the only culprits that have been, brought to book are the ones who will just carry their own cross. But, the menace will not be uprooted in its entirety. And so, if suppose, this thing was to have a dimension of, let's say, for instance, it was the other way around. Like in this case, you can just try to imagine a scenario where, Raila Odinga's wife was being attached to the Shakahola thing. We would have seen a very, very intensified political narrative where the focus now would be very clear. And the government, starting from the office of the deputy president, office of the president, and everybody would have taken serious trajectory in ensuring that, the government speaks as one, in unison, and they have a very streamlined focus. But because it is what it is right now, we are seeing everything going the way it is going. And that tells you definitely the quagmire that we are seeing right now will make us not to see the light at the end of the day, in as far as trying to eliminate this issue is concerned. One of the philosophy or the psychology that these cult leaders always use is to segregate, or use fear to isolate. So the moment we see most of the statements coming and zinagongana statements zinakuja zinagongana, huyu anasema hivi, inagongana na vile huyu anasema, mke wa rais anakuja anasema hivi ndivyo tunafaa tufanye, rais anakuja anasema hivi ndivyo tutafanya, naibu wa rais pia anakuja anasema this is what we need to do, and is kind of trying to cover something which everybody is seeing that is covering something, is inagongana, and that doesn't bring a clear show of, how the government will deal with the thing. And the only individuals, the only elements who have been caught red-handed, pants down, are the ones to carry their own cross. And once they have carried their own cross, it is up to them. It is up to them, definitely. Otherwise, the root of this menace would be so hard to uproot. And so it only renders the people in a situation of middle of the road quagmire. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? What is your interpretation from this? What do you think? What do you have from your side? Let's talk. Let's have a moment. And until we meet in the next analysis, have a great time.